All right, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jeff Mariko, and I have many roles on campus. Primarily, I'm a religious studies and philosophy instructor, but another hat that I wear is the instructional faculty liaison for the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences. So I don't want to bog you down with too much of the details around that, but just know that no matter what major you're in, you are in a clustered group of majors with closely related majors, and there are support teams in place to help you navigate what a career or an academic pathway could look like in your field of study. So I'm the person who
Yeah, he
represents
has
the
a
social
nice
and behavioral
house.
sciences, and we're putting on this
Honey,
event to
he has a nice
highlight
house.
some ways in which you all can make sure that you understand what your career pathway would look like and what you need to do while in college in order to make that happen. So this is just going to spread a little bit of light on that. I very much thank all three presenters for joining us. I'm excited about this panel and do not want to take up too much more time. So I'm going to pass the torch. Thank you, Robin.
Okay, so I'll start off with our first round of questions. And just on my screen, I see Sean, Debbie, and Matt. So I'm going to start in that order. And you may know Professor Sean Davis as a familiar face on campus. Debbie has been working in the nonprofit sector for over a decade and has experience in that as a sociology major. And my former classmate from UC Irvine, Matt Raffalo, he works in the Bay Area as the tech advisor in the tech field. So has a three very different perspectives. So the first question is, tell us about your organization and what your role is in that. Just explain some of your key responsibilities and what your day-to-day is like.
All right, thanks, Robin. As Robin just said, I'm Sean Davis. I teach in the sociology department here at Maricosta College. I'm also the faculty coordinator of our teaching and learning center. And I was a lead in creating a social work and human services program here at Maricosta that is in its first year. And so we have an introduction to social work and human services and a practicum course that allows students to get a feel for what social workers do and what human service delivery is. And they get that through service learning and going actually to organizations and observing, but also working alongside of practitioners in the field. So my day-to-day with those three big jobs really is a lot of grading and prep, student contact, a lot of teaching sociology, but also the maintenance of that social work program. You know, it was a tremendous effort with a great team of people to start the program. And now that it is fully online, literally, it is something that has been really successful on the onset here. We've filled up our introduction to social work and human services classes, both in the fall and this spring semester. So I'm really looking forward to having our first graduates for the associate degree for social work and human services, which students can do a lot with. They can move forward in their education and do social work at the social work studies at the four-year level and into graduate school. They're also qualified to be social worker ones for the County of San Diego. So it has an immediate job related benefit to be in this program, but you can also continue your education. So we really wanted to build in that flexibility there. And yeah, along with that, in the teaching and learning center and just helping faculty find new ways to connect with students, especially in this remote environment that we've been dealing with for nearly a year now, is pretty much consumes most of my work day. So that's a bit for me. I'll pass it on to Debbie, I guess.
Awesome. Well, yes, thank you all so much for being here and for the invitation to join you. My name is Debbie Lieberman, and I work for AVID, which is a pretty large national nonprofit focused in education. I'm actually curious if the chat is activated, if any of you have heard of AVID or had AVID at your schools, or maybe you were an AVID student yourself. I'd love to see you drop that in the chat. So AVID's mission is essentially to work to create more equitable pathways for students. And we work from kindergarten all the way up through middle school, high school, and even some higher ed partners. Oh, I see some AVID peeps in the chat. That's nice. My job is in data analytics and in evaluation, which sounds a little bit boring, but I promise it's not. We are basically the team that's focused on looking at how do we know if what we're doing is working? How do we do more of what works? How do we do less of what doesn't work? How do we grow our impact? And how do we anticipate some of the needs in the field that are coming? So for Avid, we are essentially a training and coaching organization. We train over 80,000 teachers, educators, principals, folks all over the school system each year in what it means to be a more equitable teacher or educator. What does it mean to make sure that all of your students are set up for success? And we also do that through coaching. So we have folks spread out all over the country. We're going into schools, helping observe in classrooms, helping to come up with plans for how schools can change their practice to make sure every student there has the opportunity to succeed. It's pretty exciting work, and I'll share more about kind of how I got there in the future in the rest of the discussion here. But yeah, happy to be here.
So I guess I'll go next. I'm Matt. I am a social scientist at Google, specifically at YouTube. I loved kind of seeing people light up the chat because I also study chat on YouTube. So I'm going to ask potentially a silly question, but if you watch YouTube, say that you do in the chat, maybe let me know, show a little love. I'd be curious to see. Okay, cool. Yes, people watch. Yeah. So I basically what I do is there's a bunch of okay, chat's definitely lighting up. Great. So I am a researcher at YouTube, and what that means is that I work with engineers, designers, marketing people, data scientists to decide what features we should build on YouTube. What's broken and needs to be fixed? What are needs that people have that we don't have features yet for? And so I will design quantitative or qualitative studies, everything from doing big surveys that are nationally representative in different regions, all the way down to interviews or field observation with my team to try to figure out those questions. So, or those answers rather. So that's kind of the short of it. I also juggle academic stuff as well. I still keep up with publishing and have an appointment at UC Berkeley that I use to do some of that academic stuff as well. So that's me.
Thank you. And I did want to thank all our panelists for being here. We really appreciate your time. Jeff, Professor Enrico is going to go with the next round of questions.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. And thank you to all of you. I think we're starting to get a better sense of who our panel is. And I'm sure more questions will develop as we go. So if you do have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. We have a number of questions we're already hoping to get to, but we'll leave some extra time at the end to get to those as well. I'm going to go in reverse order and come right back to you, Matt, because you started talking about your kind of educational path. And I'm hoping each of you can tell us a little bit about what your education path looked like. How did you navigate through it? What did you end up getting in terms of degrees? Were they necessary? And how did that lead to this career? Was there like a very close tie between your educational path that naturally just opened up into this career that you find yourself in, or was it a little more chaotic than that?
Definitely chaotic, I would say. I went to college and studied English literature, which I loved. Learning how to write has helped me every day since, and a literature major really helped with that. But after I graduated, I really had no clue what I wanted to do. I moved from Virginia, where I went to college, to New York City, grew up on the East Coast. California is definitely the best. But I moved to New York City and started working in a student services department at Columbia University. And just because of that, I was able to take classes there just to figure out what I was interested in. Eventually, I took some classes in education at their School of Education, and I just loved it. I fell in love with the readings and the work, and so started a PhD program there. Went through the whole apply, get into thing to do that. And then once I started it there, I realized like I wasn't having as much fun anymore. Like it just felt very competitive. The faculty there were so busy and didn't feel like they had as much time for me and mentoring. And so I decided to apply for different programs and ended up at UC Irvine's sociology program and loved it. Like I loved the professors there. I loved the stuff that we read and for classes and wanted to be a professor more than anything. Like I was just like talking about the books we read after class to the point where my peers, I'm sure Robin can attest, were just like, okay, enough. We need to just like have fun at this point after class. But I really wanted to be a professor. And it was because, and this is where I think the things that are most valuable is no matter what you take, the relationships you build with your professors are what helped me the most, because I ended up meeting an anthropologist who studied technology and had very similar research interests to me. And because I worked with her and she knew my interests, she was like, well, what about doing an internship in tech one of these summers? And I was like, what? Like there's internships in tech for researchers? And she got me to try doing that. And it was because of that that I realized there was this other path that didn't have to be being a professor, where I could still do some of the stuff that I love doing. So that was my path. Yeah, pretty chaotic, but ended up somewhere not too bad.
Well, I guess we can kind of keep the reverse order. I'll go next. That's all right. Funny, some similar themes here. So yes, I was one of those kids in college who could not pick a major, wanted to do everything, a lot of interests. Maybe some of you all can relate. And so when I graduated, I did graduate with a sociology degree.
I can't hear anything.
To waitress, and I could not find a waitressing job in the LA area. I was going door to door with my resume, could not even get a call back. And one of my professors from undergrad, who I was really close with and was a mentor of mine, called me up and said, hey, there's a community research fellowship back at the college I had just left. And she was like,
sorry, if we could pause, just sorry, Debbie, to interrupt.
Yeah,
sorry, Jonathan, if you can't hear, if you could just check your volume. I don't know that there's much we can do on our end, but try to check your volume. Okay, sorry about that, Debbie, go ahead.
No worries, no problem. So yes, I got a call from a professor, and she invited me or encouraged me to apply for this research fellowship back on the campus that I had just left. And I was ready to be out of there, but I didn't have much else going on at the time. So I went for it and I got it. And it ended up being kind of a door opening moment for me. Through that fellowship, I got a lot of training in what it means to do community-based research. How do you design a survey? How do you collect data in an ethical way and work in partnership with communities? And while I was in that position, I started volunteering at a high school that was based in a juvenile probation camp. So I was working with incarcerated teens, ages 13 to 18. And what I found was I had my job that was, paying the bills just barely, but I really loved being in those classrooms and being with those students. And I started to realize, like, there's something here that I'm really passionate about. That work was just super enriching. I was loving learning from those students. But it was also really heartbreaking because I would see kids who kind of hated school, had mostly dropped out of school and gotten, into trouble of some sort. And I watched them sort of open up to the educational process through some of the classes we were offering, make plans, make goals, serve their time, get out and go home to their families. And then 6 months later, I saw them back in the camps. And it really opened my eyes to how some of that cycle of poverty and inequality can really persist, even with these incredible students who were full of great potential and great ideas. And so that set me off down a path of really wanting to be part of studying and being part of how do we break that cycle, whether it's a mental cycle or physical barrier or economic barrier that keeps people in those patterns. And I, for me, believe that education is one of the ways to break out of that cycle and to address inequality. And so that set me on a course of a variety of jobs in the education space, kind of from cradle to college career. I worked in early education, worked with middle schoolers, worked with community college students, really with that kind of central theme of how do we make education a more equitable opportunity for folks to find their passion and have access and opportunity to pursue what they want to do. And with that, raise their families and their communities through that process. So that's still what I'm doing today, but the roles have looked really different. So there were times where I was a trainer, times where I was a grant writer, times where I'm crunching data. And so even though kind of that through line, that passion for working in education reform has been consistent, the role has been a little bit of a more meandering journey. I would just add to Jeff's question, I did not attend grad school. I kept kind of waiting for that moment in my career where I needed to go back and get the degree to get the job I really wanted. But I've been really fortunate in that I've been able to find progression in my career and find jobs that keep allowing me to grow and learn. Also applied for several fellowships along the way, which gave me kind of on-the-job training. About 6 years ago, applied for a data fellowship in analytics, which, trust me, was not a space that I ever knew I would be interested in, but gave me 2 years of really incredible training and a cohort of kind of peers to learn from. So I think grad school is a wonderful option for a lot of folks and a necessary option for some careers. But in some cases, you can get access to that learning, that training on the job, or even through kind of more untraditional means.
Yeah, Debbie said a lot of things that I think are really important. And to answer one of Jeff's questions, for me, to be a college instructor, the degrees were necessary, right? Like I had to at least to teach at the community college level, have a master's degree. And my path is, you know, a lot of my colleagues who are in the room and probably a lot of students too have heard this many, many times, but it's one of those truly community college success stories. I walked into Maricosta College, really just a high school dropout, somebody who was like heavily into drugs, came from a low income neighborhood, didn't really have much going on for me, you know. So when I got here, I just took some random classes, didn't see a counselor, didn't do the things that are needed to be successful because frankly, I didn't know the things that were needed to be successful. I was just like, people are taking classes, so I'll try that out. And when I stumbled into a sociology class, when the instructor started talking, I was like, wow, this is it. You know, like I looked at her and said, that's what I want to do. And I wish somebody would have told me sooner. I probably would have got my act together. But from that day on, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. But still, even then, it was messy because that first semester in college, I had 4 classes, and including my sociology class that I was so interested in and inspired by, I had 3 Fs and a W, you know, and that was my first set of grades on my transcript. But since then, I kind of just took this linear, singular focus path to becoming a community college instructor. And I did it in such a very narrow-minded way. I was like really obsessed with this teaching and learning process in the college classroom. And I felt really at home there where I hadn't in K through 12 education. And I was really just studying my professors, each one. I mean, I would never take notes on content. I would take notes on their classroom management. I would take notes on everything that they did. I would go to office hours and just ask them what their life was like and what their everyday was. So much like we're doing this test drive in sociology, I did a test drive every time I went to office hours and really, again, just took copious notes on everything that they said, because I realized I did not have what we call in sociology the cultural capital that was necessary to become a community college professor. And so I knew I needed to get that. And the only way to get that was to receive that from other people who already did have that. So I would take notes on the things they did well, the things that they didn't do so well, activities and lectures that bombed or were stellar, all sorts of things. And that was kind of my accelerated course within my courses on how to be a teacher, and went really just, again, narrow-minded. I was like, okay, I need a master's degree. So my advisors really said I should apply to these programs, gives you a better opportunity. Cultural capital, it's an idea. We have that in the chat. What is cultural capital? It's basically the habits, tastes, expectations that allow one to be successful in any given field. So like, for example, for being a professor, like I don't know what their lives are like around their job and within their job. So I would ask them questions that got to those answers and record those, and then try to build skills that represent that, or emulate a lifestyle that represents that. That's basically the very short answer of what that is. So I've applied right out of Cal State. I just transferred to Cal State San Marcos, wanted to stay local. I was working my way through college. I actually worked at the North County Times newspaper that no longer exists, and I was a press operator there. So I did that all night, and then I went to school all day, very little sleep or social life, for about 10 years. And when I applied to grad school, I applied to the master's program at Cal State San Marcos, and I applied to several PhD programs. I got in all of them, and I was like, no, I'm just gonna stay here local because I know I want to teach at Maricosta. Nobody told me that wasn't the best strategy, because once you get a master's degree and you try to get one of these jobs, first off, the jobs might not even be there. People stay in these positions for a long time. So having a full-time job is something that is, relatively rare compared to other jobs that are available out there. And so I did that, but fortunately enough, I was teaching a bunch of classes like part-time at Cal State San Marcos, Palomar, and at Maricosta. And one of my mentors, Karen Baum, who was the one that introduced me to sociology in that very first semester of community college, was retiring, and this replacement position came up, and I was fortunate enough to get that position. And so now here I am doing my dream job with the lowest qualifying degree, which is a master's degree. Since then, I've earned my PhD. I'm not my PhD. I'm sorry, my doctorate, a DSW, a doctorate of social work at the University of Southern California, USC. But yeah, definitely not a completely linear path, not a traditional path, but one that really was defined by an obsession for one particular type of job. And I don't think that is the best advice to give somebody, because that is going to lead to some heartache and disappointment. But at the same time, I will say that it did work for me. So I don't know if I'm the best person to give advice on spreading out eggs. I put them all in one basket and thank anybody that you think is up there or wherever that it worked out. So.
Thank you for those wonderful further introductions about your stories and the twists and turns that they have taken. Our next question kind of goes right along the same path, lifestyle. So we'll start with you, Matt. Is it a cool campus? Do you get to travel? And a lot of our students have families already. Is your job or career path, is it a family-friendly one? And then we're in a weird space. So you could also add on, like, how has COVID changed your day-to-day?
Yeah, these are great questions. I think before COVID, I have to admit, part of the lore of working in tech is that, like, all of those movies about Google and Facebook campuses, like, they're kind of true. Like at YouTube, they like feed you, they have slides in between floors that people actually use to get between floors. Like it's a little much, but like really fun. What a lot of big tech companies do, like Google and YouTube, Google and YouTube are the same thing, by the way, just so folks know, is that they mirror work-life balance based on like bougie college life, where you can kind of go to work one day and attend some meetings, or maybe not sit at your desk. You'll sit on a couch at a different part of the building and you could be there all day, and that's fine. Some people there's like a Google badge that we get that gives you access to any Google office in the world. And so a lot of people will just work from somewhere else for a couple of weeks and it's no big deal. It's pretty idyllic. But of course, all of that is gone right now. We're all working from home. And I think a lot of people in the tech sector have really lucked out because technology is what has helped keep people connected. I mean, we're all on Zoom, right? In these crazy times. And so actually the demand for work, like all of us that work at YouTube and Google joke like, oh, we're working like twice as hard right now because there's just so much to do. And Jonathan, just your question, I'm a researcher for YouTube, which is part of Google. And so I support product development features that we build at YouTube. It's pretty family friendly. I think if you can work in big tech, they really take care of you. It's pretty tough to get in, I've now realized looking back, but I will say on my particular path, which is to do the like PhD route, you know, I don't know that going to graduate school and getting a PhD is necessarily family friendly. It requires a lot of investment to carve out the time to just throw yourself into studying and doing research all the time and doing, you know, extra hours to get the attention of professors so that they can hopefully help you out someday. And so, you know, it would be good to kind of talk to people that have families that are navigating that as a way of doing it. But, you know, if you do work in tech at some point, it is great for families. Like they do, I mean, we're so lucky. They do like family events. They'll turn the YouTube main lobby into a carnival for family days for kids, people to bring their kids in and stuff like that. So that's my.
That sounds pretty cushy. Sounds pretty enticing. I will burst all of your bubble a little bit here, being from the nonprofit sector. So again, for folks who joined late, I work at a large national nonprofit. I do data and evaluation. And I've worked in a range of nonprofits. So like there are nonprofits where your office is also your cafeteria and it's also like your supply room. And so there's, you know, a whole range of size and budget and kind of how grassroots versus how corporate a nonprofit might look. On that scale, Avid is actually pretty big, very well funded, and pretty corporate feeling. So we get, you know, lots of free meals and there's a lot of social engagement. There is happy hours and stuff where, you know, they're bringing us together and really building the culture and kind of really trying to build a team, which I really appreciate being at an organization that can afford to do that, but also values that kind of team building because it does make a difference in the work. I think in general, the nonprofit space, the work is a work of passion and heart. So there's pretty much an unlimited amount of work. The day doesn't necessarily stop just because, you know, the clock hits 5. I think it's really important for folks interested in this space to learn about boundary setting and setting kind of your own cadence for how you're going to maintain self-care and maintain your motivation through the work. Because we all, and this probably goes for any job or any industry, I mean, you can burn yourself out if you want. No one's going to stop you. So there is definitely some learning in drawing some boundaries there in terms of work-life balance. My 2 jobs ago, I worked at a smaller but pretty, actually a national nonprofit as well. And I looked around and realized that I worked on a team with like 30 other 20 to 30 somethings and nobody had kids, not a one. And so I started to realize maybe this like isn't a very family friendly place for me to think about having a family. And that was one of many reasons I ended up leaving that position. But I'd say, you know, look around at the culture, at the people, at the type of environment that workplace offers. And I think you'll find there's really a range. So if that's important to you, I think you should ask that in an interview. You should look for those signals when you visit the office. because that does make a huge difference in terms of your ability to stick it out and do the hard work and stay really sustained in the work.
Debbie,
Yeah.
sorry, Sean, before we move on, there was a question earlier. I don't know if you were able to address it in the chat. One of them was, do you think the benefits of working at a nonprofit versus like a corporation, can you speak to that at all? And then someone else, Jonathan, asked, what's an example of something you would research? You talk about doing research in this role. What do you research?
Sure. Well, yeah, to that first question, I think one of the things that really appeals to me is I'm working with people who all have the same passion for the mission of the work that we do. And, you know, not to say that that's better or worse than a corporate or a for-profit environment, but it does attract a certain kind of like-minded type of team. And so for me, that's been really important and kind of establishes a foundation for my peers and colleagues, and just a different kind of motivation. You know, we're not motivated by trying to make money or sell the most whatevers. We're trying to make a difference in kids' lives. And that's really, even on your hard days, when you're working really late or you're exhausted or you're sick of a project, you can go back to that mission and feel kind of fueled by that. And then to the other question about research, a lot of our work is around researching what are the needs of educators in the field. In particular, COVID has been an interesting time to be studying education, as you can imagine. In the last year, the needs of teachers and principals and school leaders has pretty much gone, you know, done a 180. And so how do we support teachers who've never taught digitally or via a screen to actually do that effectively with a room full of middle schoolers? How do we make sure that when they do that, when they make that switch as a campus, that they're still reaching the kids who need that support the most? So that's just an example of some of the work we've been doing recently. But obviously before that, we were looking at all different kinds of trends and issues that come up in schools and for teachers across the country.
Perfect, thank you so much. And Sean.
There's one more question. I think it's for you, Debbie, and it's to elaborate on that. If you can get to it, how can someone who is interested in nonprofit sector get involved before getting their bachelor's degree, or is there a way outside of working toward a degree? And before you answer, I just want to say that getting involved in service learning at Maricosa is a great way to get going. That is something that is available to you to do either in conjunction with a class that requires service learning or has that as an option, or you can do that independently, and you can earn a service learning certificate with 15 hours of service at a particular organization, and it can be, most of them, I think maybe all of them are nonprofit, and our K through 12 schools in the region. So that is one starting place that at Maricosa where you can at least see what that day-to-day work looks like and what the various roles are at those places. But if Debbie wants to add.
I mean, that's exactly what I would say. I actually started as a volunteer, and that's how I kind of got my foot in the door and started to see what that world is like. So definitely, I'd say, look at internships, volunteering, or community-based type partnership work, which it sounds like your campus has. Those are awesome ways to just kind of dabble and see, and even like try on a couple different things. When I was in college, I worked at a rehab facility. I worked in a hospital as an intern. These were unpaid, but it was great experience just to see, like, what is this work environment like? What is it like to come here every day and do this kind of job? So highly recommend, especially in the nonprofit space. There's a lot of need for that kind of support. So nonprofits are generally really open and eager for that kind of help.
And our moderator just put in the chat the link to the service learning website for Maricosa.
Sean, as we move to you, I'd also like to circle back. A student, actually now 2 students have reached out to me directly and asked if it's okay to ask about salary ranges. I'm not here to ask any of you to tell us how much you make, but I think there is that underlying fear of, if I get a sociology degree, can I support myself? If you can speak to any of that, I would appreciate it as well, to your level of comfort, of course.
Well, my salary is right there. You can look it up. It's public. It's part of public record, so you could check it out. I was going to talk about that a little bit, and then the other folks can touch on that too, because they're in totally different spaces. Being a teacher is really, at any level, it's a tireless job. There's never a time when you don't have anything to do. Like, your to-do list just grows. It never is complete. And it seems like things are just added all the time. So, you do have to create boundaries of like how much you're willing to do for your classes, for your students, in order to preserve yourself in the long term. And as Jeff knows, and Robin and some others, I'm not really good at that. I kind of just do more and more and more. So in that way, it cannot be family friendly. If you're just doing this work all the time, in the service of others, maybe you're not servicing your family so well. And so, that's something that I reflect on often. And I have 2 daughters, and they need, a good amount of quality time with me. And so I think it is family friendly because I do get the weekends with them. I do get winters and summers. These are opportunities for me to have that quality family time. And it's good for that. And I do get paid a very good salary in my view for what I do. And it supports the things that I do both in work and outside of work. And so that, I don't know about a range. Again, you could just look it up, but I make more than enough. And especially somebody who came from poverty, like, I make way more than enough than I don't even understand a middle class salary, even at this point in my life, just because of where I came from. So I will say that. And then the way that COVID and this whole pandemic situation has changed my work, obviously it's changed it in the same way that you all are experiencing right now, right? We're doing Zoom classes, everything being online. I was fortunate enough to be really trained and experienced in online education prior to this situation, but it's still tough. I miss the classroom. It is really hard not to physically be in the same space as students and have those experiences with them. That's when you think about becoming a teacher, those are the moments that you are looking forward to. You don't look forward to looking at an online Canvas shell and filling things out and grading that way. You look forward to those real interactions that you have with students and those interactions that are meaningful because you know that there's a lot of learning going on. So with that, I would say that it's changed. I'm the Teaching and Learning Center coordinator again. So moving online in partnership with Jim Julius here at Maricosa, who is our faculty director of online education, we worked our butts off from March of last year when we first went to that remote instruction pivot to today in providing resources and training and all sorts of things for faculty to make this the best situation that it can be. And so that has really consumed a lot of my time and effort at the college. So I would say that, yeah, this can be a very family friendly job. And I think right now we are all trying to figure out how we can manage our lives with these current challenges that we're facing. Like all my kids, they're on Zoom too. And so going to school together, but we do have empathy for each other. We've developed this level of empathy that like we have meetings at different times. We know when we need to leave each other alone. We know when there needs to be quiet, but then, we also have that really strong pull to reconnect in between those times and at the end of the day. So, yeah, I'll kind of stop there and pass on the salary question to the other 2 panelists with the quick note that being a full-time tenured professor, which is the position that I'm in, is a position that it provides a living wage and security and legal protections that are very beneficial for my position. If you're a part-time instructor, and that's how most of us start out, it's a whole different situation. It's not equitable. These folks, they don't know if they're going to get classes or not. They are usually, like I mentioned earlier, going between campuses, like when I worked at Cal State, Palomar, and Miracosta, and just kind of piecing together their salaries and their wages in order to make it work for their families. So there's a diversity of positions and within what we do as teachers, and some of them are more lucrative than others, and some are not at all. And I think so in that way, it does become a labor of love, but there are opportunities to make a livable wage.
And Debbie, I just wanted to say, if you want to speak to the salary, I think kind of the larger question here is some people hear nonprofit and they don't understand what that means. I've mentioned, for those of you who do not know, Debbie is actually also my life partner and wife. And whenever I talk about Debbie's nonprofit work, people assume that she does not get paid for the work she's doing, that she's volunteering her time. And that's a myth that I think we constantly have to dispel.
Yes, that's definitely a myth. I will say I have had a range of positions and salaries, and I've been fortunate enough to continue to see progression in my career. Part of that is having some of the cultural capital that Sean was talking about earlier. Some of it is about applying and reaching and stretching for jobs that you may not even think you can get, but going for it anyway. And also sometimes failing a little bit. There have definitely been jobs where I've applied and thought, this is it, this is my dream job, and not been able to get it. So, you know, there's a constant process as you develop in your career. But I will say I've been really fortunate in that, especially in the position I'm in now, I do feel really very fairly compensated. As I've developed new skills, that has come with salary growth. I also am someone who has had to learn how to really advocate for myself, especially as a woman in the data space. There aren't very many women in data. So in fact, I'm on a team of all men. So there is an added layer of learning how to advocate and push, learning how to take on new and kind of stretch into new roles, and then really asking and advocating for your own salary growth as well. But I will say, I think, you know, in the nonprofit space, there's all kinds of roles. You can be an accountant, you can be a public speaker, you can be an event planner, you can be in data. And so all of those roles come with different skill sets and different salaries. And I wouldn't say that you should cross off the nonprofit space just purely because you think you won't be able to make a livable wage. You absolutely can.
Thank you, Debbie. Now, Matt, can we circle around to you? I know it might be an uncomfortable question. So you just answer as you wish.
To.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be quite honest, working in tech, they compensate very, very, very well. And I never thought I was going to choose this path. And when I started, I was pretty surprised by the difference from being a unpaid graduate student for the most part, and then kind of working in the private sector. But salaries do vary quite a bit depending on your role and what company you're at. So there are some pretty fun tools to play around with online, like Glassdoor, for example. You could just kind of see what the different salary ranges are for people that choose even different roles within Google or Facebook or some of these other big companies. So that'll be my suggestion, you know. And I started them in nonprofits and totally agree that, you know, in terms of livelihood, a lot of nonprofits actually take care of the people that work with them. And so, yes, thank you, Robin, for the Glassdoor link. Definitely, I would recommend checking that out.
Thank you. And in the interest of time and to open it up for student questions, I'm going to skip to my last final question, which is my favorite question to hear the answers to. I want you to, you know, think back where you are. And I know Sean even said he followed a crazy path that, you know, he was very lucky to get where I was. So if you were to go back in time, what piece of advice would you give your college age self? You know, if you have a story to tell or a key lesson learned, we would love to hear it. So, and I'll let whoever wants to go start us off.
Is it gonna be me? You know, I talked about that kind of really narrow focus that I had when I was going through school and through college. So I didn't really look around too much. And I would say that that advice that I would give to myself back then would be more networking and more involvement. There are so many great programs and resources and ways to work on campus, to learn more about the system of education, right? And learning these systems and the different roles that people play within those systems is so important. It gives you such an advantage later on. So if you could do student leadership, if you can get involved with student government, if you can get involved, and I know it's tough because I was working full time, so I understand like there's not a lot of time for that for a lot of us. But in any way that you can learn more about the place you're at and what people are doing at that place, the better off that you're going to be. And then you'll know, you know, what kind of role you want to play within this system or a similar system. When I was going to classes at Maricosta, I didn't even know about a student government. I couldn't tell you who the student government president was at the time. I didn't know that we had a board of trustees. I didn't know what the college president did. I didn't know even like so many things, you know, so many roles on campus that I was unaware of all the people that are making this possible. And so I would say getting involved and becoming aware and learning about that would be one thing. And then the other thing is mentors. You know, mentorship is so important. There are people out there doing what you want to do, and simply asking or even forcing them to become your mentors is so valuable because they could tell you what the day-to-day looks like. They can tell you how they would answer this question, and that would bring a lot of value to you. But also, the thing that I think is really important about mentors is you can ask them, especially if they're later in their careers, what did they not get to? What's the next thing that they were like, if I had more time, this is how I would be doing this job now. And that's what you could start to get to work on, right? And you don't have to just emulate and copy what they're doing. You can see what kind of questions they have still about their field, and what things are they curious about, and what direction they feel like things are going. And you can get a real great head start in going in that direction. So that's my answer to that one. Oh, they're everywhere. Just whatever you want to do, Sophie. We get the question of how do you find mentors? Well, first off, think about what kind of career field you want to get into, and then see who are the people there, the successful folks there, and reach out to them, email, phone call. Can't really do face-to-face stuff, but there's a lot of different ways that you can learn about them and what they're doing.
That is a great question, Sophie, too. Oh yeah, I'll let you go. I would say come to your professor's office hours too. That we're there, and we love talking to our students. Most people, if you ask them what they do, they also like to talk about themselves. So it'll be a really easy conversation. But yeah, I would definitely reach out there and think about office hours as that opportunity. We are there for you at that time. And carry on, Matt.
No, yeah, my kind of lesson learned is actually very in line with what you're saying and what Sean's saying. I think when I was in college, I wasn't in a very good place. I was struggling with, just a little TMI, but like I was struggling with like coming out back in college, and it wasn't a very supportive university environment that I was in back in the day. And I just was really struggling. I wasn't taking care of my mental well-being. It was hard for me to focus on work. And so I think what I wished I could have done better, which I think would have helped with some of that, is exactly what these folks are saying. Like Sean mentioned cultural capital before. Well, another term in sociology is social capital, the power of who you know. And, you know, if you set up if I had set up meetings with faculty members to learn about their career or learn about their work, build a friendship or relationship with them, there are unknown benefits that come from that down the road that they will plug you into. Like, for example, maybe they have a study they want to do and they remember, who can help me with this study? Well, this student talked with me that they were really interested in that project. Maybe I should ask if they want to help out. That kind of stuff is a benefit of social capital. And I wish, kind of thinking back, if I had, not been afraid to just email a professor and be like, I loved this class that you talked about. How did you learn that? Like, where did you, like what Robin said, like professors love talking about themselves. No offense to those of us that, do that kind of work, but it's just a good opportunity to get to know people. And usually there's benefits that come from that down the road.
I second all of that, of course. I think networking is so valuable and something I'm really bad at and actually just dread doing. So I'll give you guys another possible activity. So if I were going to give myself some college advice, like I said, I was one of those students who, I wanted to take classes in every discipline. I could not pick one thing that I felt like I had to pick the thing I was going to do for the rest of my life. And I'm 19. How can you ask me to do that? So here's what I would have you do. Take out a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, and on one side, write down a couple of the classes that you have actually loved to go to. Like, you kind of looked forward to going to that class. Or maybe pull out the course catalog of MiraCosta or the college that you're hoping to transfer to, and read through some of those classes that just sound so cool and you can't even believe that you're going to get credit for studying this thing, and write those down. And then look at that list and see if you can find a common theme or commonality, because I bet there is something there that speaks to something that you're passionate about. You may not quite know how to bundle it up into words, but think about, is there a common theme across those classes that really got you excited? I'll give you an example. I took gender in the workplace, a class on border politics, and a class on the history of hip hop. Those seemingly have nothing in common. They're in different disciplines. But when I look at them now and I think about where I've landed, there is a common theme around inequality and the movements that rise up to combat inequality. And guess what? That's kind of what I've ended up trying to commit my career to. So I think look at what's really excited you in your college career so far, or what excites you if you had all the time to take the classes you wanted, and try to see if there's a nugget there that you can hold on to. And that might be something to think about as you look for a career. I bet there's a job out there that lets you focus on that thing. And then on the other side of that sheet of paper, I would say, think about what you love to do in your free time. If you had a day to yourself, what would you spend that day doing? Would you get together with friends, maybe post-COVID? Would you spend it hiking? What are the activities that if you got to pick how you spent your time, you would just savor an hour to do this thing? And the reason I say that is because in actuality, you're going to pick to work for an organization or a agency. And I think it's important that your passions align with the mission of that agency, whether it's YouTube or MiraCosta or Avid or a nonprofit. But the things that you spend your day on every day, like a lot of your hours of your day, you also want to make sure are aligned with how you like to spend your time. So if you don't like being in the spotlight or being in a crowded room with a ton of people, you probably don't want a job where you're going to want to have to work on a giant team with a ton of people all the time. If you like putting your headphones on and jamming out to some music, you're probably going to want a job where you get some solo time, where you get to rock out to some music on your own. Think about the tasks and the ways you like to spend your time, and that might give you some insight into the type of role that you might want to look for. And then what you're hoping is you can take that passion and the tasks you like to spend time on and join those together and find a job that lets you have both of those. I feel really lucky that I've been able to do that, but I will say I didn't get there easily. There were definitely roles where I was not enjoying how I had to spend my time, and it took me a while to figure out why. So I'd say my advice is to kind of listen to what you already are drawn to, where you already are thriving, and find the job that lets you do that, because I guarantee you'll be a lot happier, and you'll just grow and move forward if you're in a space where you can really bring your whole self to the work.
Wow, thank you all. This is wonderful. I'm just following the chat here. Students are loving this advice, and I hope each of you take this to heart. Maybe you're taking notes and you can actually work through some of these skills that they're giving you. I have one more quick question that came from some submitted student questions beforehand, and we can be rather quick with this one, and then we'll leave another about 10 or 15 minutes for questions for anyone who's attending the Zoom meeting now. I want to make sure there's time for that. So just in a minute or so, I thought there was a funny question on here that each of you I would like to answer. Do you have to be an extrovert to work in sociology? I'm seeing shaking heads all across the board. Can all of you say a quick word to that?
The quick word is no. You could be an introvert, and I think there's a need for more of those type of folks in what we do. You know, Matt talked about a lot of professors like to hear themselves talk, and it's certainly true. And I could talk all day, but the quiet, more reserved colleagues, I find that they don't say much, but when they do, it's definitely worth listening to. And a lot of people who may not want to be the sage on the stage and give this big performative type of lecture or be engaging in that way, they go into research, and the research is what really informs our teaching. So it's the other side of things that's so important. I mean, I get to just be a reporter and a facilitator while these people are doing the work of helping us define in clearer terms what social reality is. And that's the work of the researcher. And it's very, very important work, and introverts usually thrive in those kind of environments. So I would say no, definitely not. I actually know quite a few sociologists that really don't want to interact with anybody.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I think, you know, introvert, extrovert, qualitative, quantitative, all these different things that people are drawn to and interested in and how they express themselves, they each bring value to the work that they do. I mean, I like giving talks, I like interacting with my team, but all of those are very like carefully planned. Like even this, like I'm an introvert, but you know, I'm prepared. Like I'm not kind of being super outgoing per se at my job most days. So and I still have an impact and really enjoy working with the people that I do. So
Yeah, I'll just jump on with that too, because I am pretty introverted as well. And so I would say totally you can be in this space and be an introvert. Obviously, we all or some of us are. But I'd also say there's some value in trying on some stuff that maybe is a little bit outside your comfort zone. So like I am not someone who likes to be in the spotlight, but as I mentioned in my discussion of sort of how I landed here, I started getting into this career by teaching in the front of a classroom, which took a lot out of me. It was like really hard to kind of get excited and get the energy up for doing that. And then I felt really tired afterwards, which is kind of classic introvert behavior. But it did push me and help me develop my voice and help me to kind of stretch a little bit. And it also helped me realize, hey, I don't want a job where that's all I do all day, because I will burn out and be exhausted. So there's definitely room for trying some stuff that maybe you're not drawn to right away. I mean, data and analytics is another. I was not a good math student in college. I think I took like, the bare minimum math classes and never thought that I'd be in an analytics type role. But because I came to it through the thing that I was passionate about and I had folks who were willing to teach me, I found that I really love that space. So sometimes there is value in trying out something that's a little outside your comfort zone.
Thank you for that. Those are all wonderful pieces of advice. And I just would have one question to kind of tag along that was also among the questions that student had asked. And I think about my own experience dreading doing that, talk in front of the class, right? But was there a soft skill or something that maybe was outside your comfort zone that really helps you, or that you use more than you thought you would have, that students might not consider, being part of a career plan?
And before answering that
I mean,
question too, sorry, Matt, just to interject, I want to make sure that our students know the difference between soft skills and technical skills. If anyone wants to speak to that before going through this, that might be helpful.
yeah, sure. And I think the technical skills I got in graduate school, and they made very clear, like, oh, learn how to do research, learn how to analyze data, all of that stuff. Some of the soft skills were actually, I think, for me, the hardest in graduate school. In our program, we had to do a master's thesis, which, at least in our cohort, everyone was terrified of. And for the most part, at least for me, it had nothing to do with doing a good study. It had to do with presenting that work and taking questions from very tough professors, like that, where there were like stories of people being stressed and I was so stressed during this presentation that I think I did well, but I don't remember anything from the moment I got up there to the moment that I got down. It was it's like gone from my memory. I don't think that that's the ideal way to practice this kind of stuff. But over time, I've learned that even though I'm an introvert and that something like that was scary, that if you habituate, if you just practice doing it in a group of caring and supportive people that are willing to give you feedback every time you try and do it, it becomes like second nature. Now, so much that I actually turn on a particular mode when I give a talk, and it can be really fun. Now, there are certainly other things that are still challenging for me, but stuff, hopefully kind of telling that, it makes it a little easier to think like, okay, well, how can I do this thing that I wasn't able to do before?
Terrific. Sean or Debbie, you want to take that on? Do you have anything to add or share?
I can add a couple of soft skills that I honestly feel like my soft skills have gotten me further than my tech skills in my career. So I can't emphasize enough how important some of this type of work is. And I bet you it comes even a little bit more naturally to you than you think. I'd say the first thing that comes to mind is relationship building, being able to connect with folks, spend time just building a genuine connection, whether it's with a teammate or a client or a partner in the work. I mean, so much of the work that we do in nonprofit hinges on really genuine partnerships and folks being willing to open up and do the work with you. And that's something that's really hard to get formal training on, but it definitely comes with practice and is a kind of a cultivated skill, like a real mindset to go in and think about, how am I going to make sure this is really a comfortable space for this person to connect with me and for me to really make sure I'm showing this genuine desire to partner together. So that kind of relationship building, I think, is an important skill. You probably get some of that through your coursework when you have to work with a partner or do a group project. I mean, I actually kind of hated those tasks in college, but in retrospect, there was a reason we had to do those things. And part of it was really about learning how to interact and share ideas with someone who's really different from you or has different thinking. So, give that its due. And then I think the other thing that's really been helpful for me is just developing strong communication skills. And that goes when you're working with a boss and making sure you're meeting their expectations. If you're managing a team, being able to really communicate well and support colleagues or teammates. But also, I think for me, because I work in data, a lot of people are really intimidated by data. And a lot of the folks in the data space have a very technical mindset. One of the strengths I've been able to leverage is that I can talk about data kind of like an everyday person would, which people tend to like because it makes it a little more approachable, a little more manageable. So I think just being able to develop and hone a comfort with how you talk about the thing that you're passionate about, whether that's data or something else, but really focusing on how you consolidate your ideas, you kind of organize your thinking so that you can be a really strong communicator.
Terrific. Thank you, Debbie. And Sean, I know you might have a professor's perspective on this.
Yeah, of the soft skills, when I think about soft skills, the two that come to mind immediately for me, flexibility, adaptability, and interpersonal skills, which they've already touched on here. But I think in the last year, if we haven't learned that flexibility and adaptability are important soft skills to have, then we're never going to learn that. And the same thing applies to what I do in my work, because I know that students are all facing different situations. And if I'm just so rigid in my policies and so rigid in maybe even being punitive with the way that I approach my work, everybody suffers. Students suffer, I suffer. It's no good for anyone. So I try to remain as flexible and adaptable as possible. Interpersonal skills, this is a job where you're interacting with a lot of the public, people that are vary in age, vary in socioeconomic status, and race, ethnicity, culture, language. And if you do not develop the interpersonal skills, cultural competency, understanding of difference, and understanding of similarities as well, it's going to be a really uphill battle in doing the kind of work that we're charged with as community college educators. And the last thing I would add is that a focus on getting it right as opposed to being right. As professors, we're given this title and we have these degrees and we have this level of expertise. It's really easy to slip into, I know this and I'm right about this. And that kind of gets in the way sometimes of us really engaging in the learning process with our students. This isn't just for them, this is for us as well. And if we think we're just here to provide something for them to have, or if that's what students kind of come with, like, you have something that I need, that's not a true relationship. And there's not going to be that deeper learning that happens in that kind of relationship. It's just transactional. And this is not a transactional area of work that we're in. We're in as Matt said, and I think Debbie said too, we're in a relational type of work. This is people coming together for the common goal of understanding the world better. I feel like that's the way that I want to describe what a higher education is. And I hope that students leave with at least knowing that that's my understanding of it.
Before I open this up to any further questions from the students, if you would share in the chat, maybe your LinkedIn or contact. So if students did have, there's some kind of in-depth questions in the chat here that are specific to each of you. So if you wouldn't mind sharing maybe your LinkedIn or a way that a student could ask those questions. And I'll ask any students, do you have any questions for our panelists?
And while we wait to see if there are questions, I wanted to thank all of the panelists, not only for your preparation, involvement, your time, but thank you so much for answering the questions in the chat as we moved along. It was a really helpful way to kind of keep multiple conversations going at once, some more specific questions, others we were able to open up to the whole group. So my deepest gratitude to all of you. You're really on it and paying attention and involved here, so thank you. We do have a few more minutes, so if you have a question, under the reactions button on the bottom, you can raise your hand, which will alert us, or you can write more questions in the chat. So here's one from, it looks like Maricela. I was wondering if it matters if I major in social work or sociology to become a social case worker? That sounds like a question for Sean. If you're able to, Sean, we can also skip you if you need a minute or two.
I'm good. I'm good. You do not need a degree in social work or sociology to become a social worker. Usually in that field, an MSW, which is a master's in social work, that's pretty much the industry standard, to be honest with you. And I developed this program because I had a lot of sociology students who were like, what am I going to do with this? You know, they're getting questions from their friends and family about what do you do with a sociology degree? And a lot of them wanted to become social workers. So I was like, we need to get them going now. And that's really what this it's an exploratory thing. Like you go to the social work class and then you find out if this is the area that you want to pursue. But as I did say earlier, when you have a degree in social work from Maricosta, this associate's degree, you are qualified to be a social worker one at for the county of San Diego. So there is that immediate job application for that particular degree. But you can major in whatever, and as long as when you transfer and then again majoring in whatever, human development, psychology, maybe a related or unrelated field, when you go into your graduate applications and you're looking at different programs, you can then just apply to get into an MSW program and then pursue social work from there. But as always, I would see an academic counselor. They're going to be able to give you the best advice. This is my advice coming from developing the program and being a sociologist, but our counselors and career counselors are really the place to go to chart out that path and think about those kind of questions.
Great, thank you, Sean. Are there any other questions that come to mind? We only have a few minutes left.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Maria, thank you. Go ahead.
This question is for Professor Sean. My question here is, are you first generation college student? And two, how long did it take for you to get your master's degree?
I'm first generation everything. My mom was an immigrant. I'm first generation college student.
I'm gonna open my window so you can look at me.
There you go, Maria. So I was at Maricosta for 3.5 years. I did my finished up at the 4-year university, my upper division courses in 2 years. So that one was on time, as we say, then my master's degree was 3 years, and then my doctorate was 2.5 years. So really just weird timelines, all of those. But you know, it took me a long time to get out of Maricosta, and it was a slow start. And so, yeah, the master's degree was, what did I say, 3 years? Yeah, that's right. Yes.
So 3 years from when you got out of Maricosta, it went 3 years? So what about the bachelor's degree? How does that come in, or just jump straight to the master's?
So I transferred to Cal State San Marcos, and then the upper division schedule was a 2-year schedule, and I to do that within that 2-year timeline. And then when I got into the master's program, it was a 2-year program, but I had to take another year because, well, my daughters, I started a family at that time, which is the best time. But what I've learned is there's no good time to start doing that. So it's just when it comes, that's when you're forced to be ready. So yeah, I had 2 kids during graduate school. And that extended my timeline there for my master's degree.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to ask a question.
Sure, go ahead, Jonathan.
I'd like to hear more from Matt and also Debbie, more about like what the examples of the research process. You know, like in biology, you might like test a sample, but I'd like to hear more about the science part of and the data analysis part and stuff. You know, yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's a great question. I'm going to give you both a brief moment to answer, and then I believe we're going to have to probably end on that note just to keep respect for everyone's time. I'm sure Matt, Debbie, and Sean have packed schedules. So please take a minute or two to answer Jonathan's question, and then we'll do one last thank you before we conclude here.
you want to go, Debbie? Happy to. Okay. Yeah, so there's a whole range of methods, quantitative and qualitative, that we use in sociology and in social science research. It could be interviewing, it could be statistics from survey data. And so basically my research process is identify what the research questions are. Do people like YouTube or not? You know, whatever it is. And then matching the right method to that. Well, do I want to know why people like YouTube? And if it's a why question, then that's probably qualitative. And so I might do an interview study with people who do and don't like YouTube to try to figure out how they talk about using the tool and what works for them, what doesn't. Analyze that for patterns and then present it as a report. So I usually go through that process for every project I do, but using different methods of analysis depending on it.
Okay.
Yeah, very similar in my space. I think the idea is largely borrowed from the hard sciences in that there's a hypothesis, there's a research question or an evaluation question, and then there's a method for gathering the data, which is similar to what you would do in a lab. It's just different types of data because it's data about what people think or how people behave. And then looking at that to really study what can be, what are the findings that we can take and then maybe put into action around a new product or changing how we.
Could you give examples of the research questions you've tackled and the processes you used?
Sure. So for Avid, a lot of our work is around, you know, we delivered a training to 10,000 teachers. How do we know if that actually changed how they teach their students? And how do we know if their students were actually better off because of that training? So that might be some of the kind of high level question that we'd be asking. And we'd be collecting data from the teachers who received those trainings, but then also on the students to look at the outcomes and see if something changed as a result of the service we provided.
Sounds fun.
It is fun. Thank you for the question.
And thank you to everyone who posed questions, whether via the chat or unmuting yourself. This is so much better and more enriched because of your involvement. So we very much appreciate it. I again want to take one moment to thank the panelists and thank all of you. This was just such a joy. And for my students, there will be more of these to come. Again, I am your faculty contact for the entire School of the Social and Behavioral Sciences. So we have done one of these on child development and psychology before. We are doing sociology now, and I believe we're going to try to tackle political science next. So stay tuned for any emails. If you want to become involved more with the social and behavioral sciences, you can email me directly and I'll get you into a Canvas page where we update you frequently on what's happening on campus. And then I'm going to turn it over to Robin to just kind of end things out here.
Yes, thank you so much to our panelists. I appreciate all of what you've shared with our students. I'm taking notes myself, so I learned a ton. I loved some of this advice that you've given, and we just appreciate you and thank you so much. Great to see you. All right.